Karis painter. This is Moves Unfiltered. We explore the dance communities of Philadelphia. We learn how dance is a vehicle of culture, conveying traditions, music, and history. I'm a dancer, an advocate, a storyteller. Come with us as we explore Moves Unfiltered. Media. We're pleased today to welcome our guest, who is a licensed social worker. We're going to talk about the current pandemic. Communities in Philadelphia and across the country have been struggling with issues of drug abuse, gun violence, food security, and housing before the pandemic. These communities have further been affected, and some of these issues have only been exacerbated by the restrictions and by what various people in the community have experienced. Today, I am welcome to have Zoe, who is a social worker, an avid traveler, a tango dancer, and she supervises at-risk patients in the Philadelphia community through her work with the local health plan. She's also a Fulbright specialist candidate selected to serve abroad as an expert consultant in the Philippines, with her placement currently pending. Zoe trains and supervises social workers in impoverished at-risk communities in Philadelphia. Zoe also has a passion for design, which led her to join the American Institute of Graphic Arts Women Lead Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She curates the cast of characters, a multilingual design exhibition at Blue Cadet Design Studio in Philadelphia. Welcome, Zoe.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's so great you could join us on this Friday. So, Zoe, I guess we'll start off with, what community do you work with, and what type of work do you do, and how might has this work changed given the pandemic?
I work for a health plan in Philadelphia, and we serve at-risk patients in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. These patients live primarily in North Philadelphia, West, South, and the Northeast. So I guess you could say all of the neighborhoods we serve patients that have diabetes, COPD, heart failure, asthma. A lot of the patients we support through a care coordination program are provided with health education, resources, including mental health, as you mentioned, which could include drug and alcohol counseling. We refer people to programs that include movement, wellness, cooking classes, Zumba, yoga. So we're involved heavily in preventative care or helping people to improve their health outcomes with those different types of resources.
Hmm. What issues have you seen come up over the past couple weeks?
Well, upon the pandemic affecting Philadelphia, the health plan that I work for leapt into action, and we came up with a way to reach people. We do all telephonic outreach.
Mhm.
So we are calling people, sending letters, sending information to educate them both on the CDC precautions to help keep themselves safe and healthy. We are referring them to food resources. In the beginning of the stay-at-home order, there was a big influx of calls asking for food, in addition to what people were having for their normal weekly intake. So they wanted to, just like the rest of us, they wanted to have a storage of dry goods and things that they may not normally be able to have. So we refer patients to a wonderful program in Philadelphia called MANA, and also the Hunger Coalition, and they were able to get shelf stable products. So there was a big influx of requests for food, but then we also were referring people to mental health support if there was an increase in stress or difficulty coping emotionally with all of the uncertainty, and making sure that people are connected to telemedicine or telehealth, that they could still have their scripts filled and reach their doctors. We also have a program, a 24-hour, 7-day a week teledoc hotline, where if people aren't able to reach their primary care doctors, that they could speak with a nurse practitioner
Mhm.
or a physician's assistant and also receive scripts and for non-emergent issues, consultations. So we've seen an increase in those needs and developed an internal task force, and then have been involved with calling people who especially have conditions with comorbidities, meaning if they contracted COVID, they were at higher risk of fatalities. And
Mhm.
diabetes is an example of that, or any compromised lung condition.
We were talking before we went on the air a little bit about especially the communities in North Philadelphia, how gun violence had affected them pre-pandemic and the shutdown of many services and the stay-at-home orders, that we were talking about a lot of these people are staying at home, which is very similar to what they were doing before. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Well, we were talking about how, yes, I think the point that stands out to me that is that people who live in neighborhoods that have a lot of gun violence to begin with, that staying at home and not being outside is also a means of survival or keeping yourself safe. So over the years of being involved in social work, either as someone who did direct outreach, or now I'm in the role of being a supervisor and a support to the staff doing the outreach as well, I have been told by parents who are protecting their children by keeping them inside, or adults themselves who have very limited and very specific reasons for venturing out. It's usually if it's to go to families' houses, or if it's just to obtain groceries and come home. So there is a sense of staying in place to keep oneself safe if they have housing. Yes, that existed before and it exists now.
Mm. We also talked about reaching out, and you mentioned that you would ask individuals how do they feel about their mental health. And my reaction, I was very surprised that people wouldn't admit necessarily, maybe I wasn't so surprised, that they were struggling. Could you talk a little bit about that and whether that's a change from what you experienced in your work prior to COVID-19?
I think that the families or the patients that I've spoken to have different types of coping mechanisms or awareness or sensitivities to stressful events because of traumas that they've grown up with. There's a different type of response or perspective. If you have grown up with a lot of stressors in your community, either that result from generational poverty or different socioeconomic related reasons, then in contrast to the stresses that are happening now, your tolerance level may be different, or you may not be as aware of how it's impacting you.
Mm,
So I've spoken to people who tell me that they aren't in need of any additional support because they have prayer in their life, or their religion or spiritual practice. Or I've had people say things to me about, well, I'm staying at home, I'm washing my hands, I'm good, I just don't leave the house. There's a very direct and clear description of how they're coping, that doesn't necessarily involve utilizing the mental health services that we have to offer them. So part of it may be perspective based on how much trauma they've already experienced in their life, or the way that they connect or don't connect with feelings, because not all of us have the luxury of staying in a place of active fear because we have to survive. So if they, and I say we because I think that affects people on varying levels. We're all human, but I think with the population that we speak to, they're the idea of survival is, that's a daily experience no matter what. And this is an added stressor, but it's definitely not, um survival under pressure is not anything new.
Mm,
So I think that they may not feel the need at to engage in the counseling, and some of the people that I have spoken to already are involved. So, it just depends, but I would say there's a higher percentage of people that I've spoken to who have different methods of surviving stressors, and they don't necessarily involve engaging in the mental health services that we have to offer them.
mm. I'm curious, talking about mental health services and stressors to begin with, your experience, your knowledge or understanding of individuals who have substance abuse issues, especially in North Philadelphia. Kensington is a huge hotspot for opioid addiction. And I remember seeing on the news when the shutdown first happened and all the liquor stores were closed in Pennsylvania, and there was the stories of people driving across the border to Delaware and Maryland and Jersey to get alcohol. And one of the things that somebody brought up to me was that people who are alcoholics or use alcohol, while it may seem great in many ways that they don't have access to that, that's a huge issue. Pennsylvania has now loosened that restriction and alcohol is available at the state stores. But I'm curious, from the drug and alcohol addiction angle lens, how is that being addressed, or what issues do you see coming up with that?
I primarily speak to patients, or we engage with patients primarily through their physical health issues,
Mm,
and then learn of their co-occurring diagnoses having to do with addiction. So what I've encountered since the stay-at-home order, which includes the closing of non-essential businesses, including liquor stores, is that we still see patients using.
mm,
We have had referrals for patients who are being admitted with these types of positive urine drug screens and so on. So I think that when you are involved, there may be a decreased access in terms of the ease of going to a liquor store, but I know that I've seen that some beer distributors and stores that sell wine, at least in this part of the city, are open. But I think people are finding a way to access drugs and alcohol because of we still see admissions, or we still talk with mental health, or we collaborate with mental health providers, and there is talk of people who are on the positive side still involved in treatment, and then unfortunately, due to, well, the stressors that were already existing in the person's life that may have led to lifelong addiction, in addition to this added uncertainty and set of stressors that come along with not being able to predict the future of this illness, and avoiding the virus. People are comforting themselves or disconnecting from this difficulty by still using substances.
mm,
And so I think that it's still happening. I think it's still going on, and people find a way to access substances, even with restrictions on availability.
Sure. We were talking before we got on the air about communities that might be more isolated. And although you said you work with a population of about age 30 to 60, that seniors are a population that might feel more isolated. Could you speak a little bit to that and maybe what somebody could do who knows someone who is a older person in their neighborhood?
Yes. So we do have in within our health plan, we have Medicare outreach and Medicaid outreach. So I'm focused on serving the Medicaid population, and we do have social workers and nurses who do outreach for Medicare. And a lot of resources have been circulating throughout our company about how to assist from afar when it comes to the loneliness that can impact seniors. Patients between the age range that I was talking with you about, of course, they experience loneliness too. There are the patients that I've spoken to do have either children in the home or relatives in the home, whereas you can encounter seniors who live alone or their grandchildren or relatives may not be able to visit them because they are at a higher risk for
Mm,
contracting the illness and not surviving COVID. So we I personally and also my colleagues have done things like sewn masks, and there's an organization called Aid for Friends. So I myself wrote notes. You can write if you have a stack of index cards. That's all you need: index cards, an envelope, a stamp, and Aid for Friends. If you write encouraging notes on index cards and mail them to this organization, which I'm happy to give you the information for to link with along with the broadcast, you mail them, and what they will do is they have snack bags or lunches that are it's called contactless drop off. So they'll drop off snack bags or lunches to in front of seniors' homes that have these encouraging notes inside that telling people you can do this, you're not alone. Messages like that to seniors is what I mean, we all need to hear this now, but them reading that could turn around someone's day or just lift their spirits if they're not able to hug their grandchildren, for example. And
absolutely.
the masks are something else that people who have fabric and the talent to sew can also be sent to Aid for Friends, and they will send those. So most that's the type of
Mm,
volunteering that you can do. I think also when you write these cards, what I like about this organization is they made sure to point out that write in big bold letters because people have vision issues,
mm,
and so they might not be able to see something that's written very small. So I think this is raising a lot of awareness around the kind of help that the little things that can make a difference in somebody's day, and I include in that a little thing like writing something in very large letters. We don't have to think about that, um,
right.
yet. So yet.
This is very helpful. Zoe, we're coming to the end of our segment. I
Okay.
before we close out, you have a few organizations that you want to shout out that we could possibly volunteer or provide assistance. If you could share
Yes.
those with us, that'd be awesome.
Yes, one of the organizations that we refer a lot of patients to for meal delivery is MANA. That's MANNA.org. And they are looking for volunteers to do contactless drop off of food. And also, they observe all of the CDC recommendations inside their industrial sized kitchen to prepare food. They provide masks and gloves and a small amount of volunteers to help cook the food that is put in the meals that are delivered to people with compromised health conditions. So I suggest people go to mana.org and look at the different volunteer opportunities. Also, the Hunger Coalition is an excellent organization. They help people with applying for benefits that will enable them to buy their own food. There's also opportunities to donate goods. Again, this is all contactless. These organizations are very aware of the importance of social distancing and cleanliness. So you wouldn't be compromised in any way by volunteering for those two organizations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll put that in the link to the YouTube video as well. Zoe, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and what we can do out there in the Philadelphia community. Thank you again.
And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. So we will take a short break and we'll return with Sarah, who will dive a little deeper into what all of us may be experiencing and what we can do ourselves in this time. I'm Karis Painter. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usula Media.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
I'm Karis Painter. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usula Media. Today we're talking about the pandemic and how it has brought a total loss of control, often for individuals. They often experience anxiety, helplessness, grief, and uncertainty. The Kaiser Family Foundation reported that 45% of adults had reported that their mental health had been negatively affected due to worry and stress over the virus. Today, we're talking with two social workers, and I'm happy to have Sarah Yonan on for the second half of our program. She is a licensed clinical social worker and coach. Sarah has worked with youths and adults, and she specializes in guiding people through life's transitions, among many of her talents. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, how are you, Karis?
Good. It's good to have you here. Let's start with this time.
I'm
Okay.
I'm here. Yep. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me? Can we realistically protect our mental health?
That's a huge question, Karis. My goodness. um, yes, I mean, I don't think I would be a social worker if I didn't think that we could realistically protect our mental health. I think it takes being extremely active and proactive about to do that and to to engage and to know ourselves well enough to know what we need, which I think a lot of times is not always the case. Humanity, there's that depends on the person really. Who knows? It depends on the person as to whether they are able to recognize their needs for support and recognize their needs for gaining support. And I think that sometimes it can be difficult for us to see it within ourselves. So, but yes, of course.
Do you think this work of self exploration is something that we can do at home alone, or is this something that we need to see a mental health professional to work through?
Yeah. I think a little bit of both. It's an interesting question because I think um, this time during COVID is really giving us a lot of moments to do just that, to be alone and to be with ourselves, and that is not always easy for people to do. Um, we don't necessarily we don't necessarily know how to be with ourselves always, and so we're being faced with this, a lot of unstructured time, a lot of time to think about things that we haven't had to think about for an extended period of time because we've kept ourselves busy thinking about, you know, our kids, our families, different things, our jobs. There's so many things that can distract us. I mean, in general, American society today is so full of distractions. And then we come across this time where it's just completely unstructured and we have to structure it ourselves, and we could easily fill it with lots of things, or we could allow ourselves to be just alone, be with ourselves.
Mm,
um, and so I think there's a piece of it that is really, it's really helpful to look inward and to spend some time alone, spend some time doing that work on our own. um, but I also think it's very important to be engaging with other people when it comes to these questions, because if we don't engage with other people, sometimes we can go in a little bit of a downward spiral if we're not too careful. And
mm.
so I think that there's a place for both, really.
Mm. I like that, and almost the idea of having time to think about what we're actually feeling as individuals. I'm going to be really cheesy and throw out the idea of journaling or meditating. I'm not so much of a meditator, you know that. My meditation is on a bike or walking, but taking that time to think about what's really going on and then bouncing those ideas or having a conversation with people who we maybe feel are trusted or close to us.
But I think it's really interesting what you say when you talk about, yes, you say you're not much of a meditator, but I do think, I think you are, because movement is a form of meditation, right? And so
Mhm.
for me, actually, that's how I really engage in the meditative practice. And I think you do that all the time, with
Mm.
dance, with other things. And it's interesting how we're trying to engage in those sorts of things on a screen right now,
Mm.
and trying to find ways to do that in a small space. Really, we're looking to engage in whatever way we possibly can. So,
Mm. We were discussing, we I sent you that article about the way that we respond to grief as Americans, and looking through the lens of happiness as being this eternal place or this moment. We've had this conversation that I love to have. Um, but finding meaning in this, is that a lofty goal, to find meaning in an event where maybe you lost your job, maybe you don't have access to affordable housing or affordable health care, and you, as Zoe said in the beginning segment, your needs are much more immediate than sitting and meditating. So I guess my question is there space for growth?
is there space for growth? Absolutely. You mean within this particular situation of COVID, or you think within?
Sure, sure. Within this situation, the article I'm referring to talked about how they did research. I believe it was an institution in North Carolina, did research with people post 9/11, and then there were people
I
who really
remember this.
saw it as an opportunity to grow and say, I feel uncomfortable. I might have experienced PTSD, but those individuals who are much more resilient were able to look for meaning out of this experience, even if they were affected by 9/11.
Right.
um, Rather than just saying, I can't wait for COVID-19 to be over so I can go back to what my life was.
And I think that, excuse me, the longer this goes on, honestly, I think the more time we have to reflect about that and and looking at um, making meaning out of this. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me when I hear you talking about this is one of the things I'm constantly talking to my clients about is this place of sitting with discomfort, and how hard it is for human beings to sit within discomfort. And we are faced with that in a incredibly vivid way right now, with this crisis, because over the last 6 or 7 weeks, as we've been alone, we've been spending lots of time alone, or we've had all of this time to think. It's an uncomfortable situation. We have so much time on our hands, or maybe we don't have so much time on our hands, and the time that we do, the time that we are spending is overwrought with things that we don't necessarily want to be doing. Who knows? But it's all the same. It's an uncomfortable situation, and I think humanity, we oftentimes run away from discomfort, and here we are. We have to face it. We have to sit here, and we have to like sit with this pain, this discomfort, this yeah, and it's hard. It's really hard work to do. Hence the reason why lots of people are seeking therapeutic intervention right now, because
Mm,
it's like I'm not exactly sure how to sit in this place. I'm used to distracting myself with other things, and I think the thing that's really amazing is when we get to that place, if we can push through the pain, push through the discomfort, we oftentimes can come to exactly the place that you're talking about, the place where we can be resilient and we can recognize and we can grow from difficulty. Um, and sometimes we have to be forced into that situation, unfortunately, for us to be able to get there, from
yeah.
my perspective.
Definitely. It's almost that we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That
Exactly.
that
Yes.
there's something in that. And maybe, and Zoe and I were talking about that before, people who do have everyday challenges sometimes can be more resilient because they've seen so many things that maybe for some people that haven't had huge challenges or grief or loss, this
Mhm.
is their first time. And they there's no map or plan. We often have family members or people close to us who lose family members, or something happens to their house, there's a fire. This is brand new for everybody,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
and you have to trust yourself and trust your response. I think that's the other thing that people tend not to do, and it's something that I feel like I'm constantly, more recently, telling people is, um, these are uncharted territories. We don't necessarily know how to respond. You know, there's it's a crisis, and it's something that most people have. You know, we don't know exactly what to expect or how this is going to proceed, and with all of the uncertainty and the unknown, again, another thing that human beings are not very good at. We like to plan. We like to know what we're going to do. We like to have it all figured out. And you know, I even find myself at times like trying to plan, and I have to just let go of it, because right now there's just no way to be able to do that. um, but we can also be really hard on ourselves in the process of trying to wade through these things. And maybe there's a place for being kind to ourselves in the process and saying, you know what, we don't know. We're just trying to fumble through this best we can. We're trying to trust the people who we think know what they're doing. And in some ways, the things are going well. In some ways, things are not going well. But really, it is uncharted territory.
mm, it's almost that we have to celebrate the things that don't go well.
Hmm. I
i
like
i
that. Yeah.
i, I think one thing that jumps out to me, being on different social media platforms, everything from personal, Facebook, to more professional platforms such as LinkedIn, seems to be a lot of this is what I'm doing right now. And I'm curious how much of that is influencing what we think we should be doing.
That's it's true. I mean, there's so many. I have a friend who calls it the should monster. It's like these things that we
Mm,
always, there's all these shoulds in our lives, and I guess it comes in so many different forms, and I guess it's happening right now as well, and it makes sense because I think even for myself, as I'm trying to schedule out my day and figure out a way to like take it through, even for unstructured time is not always welcome for me. There are moments where I'm like, I should allow some unstructured time. It would be good for me to do that. And I find myself trying to structure it so much in order to just sort of like make it through at times, if that makes sense. And so there's a bit of that. What should I be doing? I need to be productive. I need to be like using this time wisely and doing something good within this time if I can, and helping people. And for me, a lot of that has to do around taking on new clients and trying to support people as they're going through this, and making sure that they have a place and a space to be supported, because it is a difficult time.
Definitely. The unstructured time jumps out to me as something that we used to have a lot of. I think, especially our generation when we were younger, we would just open the door and run outside for hours and hours.
Yes.
I actually remember sledding in the woods. Like, how dangerous was that? But that's something that has shifted over the years, and that there is less of that, especially with children. Um, and that we have to be okay. It's interesting how we have to be okay with not having a plan for every hour.
Yeah, and in speaking of, we have lots of time to read articles right now. I read an article about how children are being able to do things that they haven't been able to do, like play in ways that they haven't been able to play for a really long time, because of what's going on with having
Mm,
all of this space. Like all of these things are canceled, so they have this time to be able to engage in art, and do things that maybe like arts and crafts that they wouldn't typically have done, but because they were going to like a sporting event, or they were doing some other extracurricular activity. um, I I've always been a huge proponent, and this because we talk about these things, of allowing imagination to flow. And I think this is part of something that we are missing. I've worked with kids for a very long time, and I have found that with working with youth, oftentimes, especially youth of today, there is this need to always be entertained, always be told what to do, for everything to be structured. In the school setting, it happens all the time. And they're kind of looking to you to guide them through everything. And they sometimes have a hard time coming up with their own imaginative response. And so engaging and encouraging them to explore, and to explore in the way that they want to, and to allow them the freedom to do that. This is a time where they're actually able to do that, and it's producing interesting things. Um, and I think, it's helping us to reimagine education to some degree, and how it can be done. Um, and I think that this is, everything comes around. This is something that we did in the past. Maybe we should reconsider it again, where imagination becomes a bigger part of the educational process.
mm. I love that. That would be a going back to the idea of reflecting and what has changed. That would be a great conversation for parents and maybe schools and communities as well to have with youth, is what things did you do during this time, and the activities you did before, what did you miss, or what did you miss about them?
Hmm.
We've talked about this, Sarah and Zoe as well. Zoom classes for dance online are very challenging because it was about the human connection. It was about the physical connection. It was about reading somebody and being in a space with other people, and not just necessarily about the steps. And so while there is that opportunity to do a class virtually, all the other things about it are gone. And I have found myself not enjoying it as much.
I agree. I've been trying I've been trying to do them as well, and there's something. Well, first of all, I it's just a little bit more difficult to learn, because I'm not there in person and able to see the three-dimensional aspect of it, so I find myself, it's a little bit more challenging for me. But you're absolutely right. I miss the connection. It's like you lose something within the distance, and I think that's another interesting conversation of, it's amazing how we can do everything. So much can be done through Zoom and online. And I mean, there's so much available there, and it's wonderful for our purposes currently, but it's helping us to get back to and remember some of the things that are important about being human, and physical touch and connection and in-person conversation and being able to actually like hug the person after you have a tough conversation or touch the person in the moment. Those are things that, you know, we have a hard time doing. It's funny, it had been, I guess, probably a month into the situation, and my roommate and I decided, we realized that we could practice dance together because we're living together anyway, so we might as well like practice dance
Mm.
together. And so we tried to learn salsa a little bit. And the first time that I went to go into the embrace with him after the initial, like, it had been like a month since I had like touched anybody, and I almost said, "Is this okay?" Like, I there was like a moment of like, I'm not sure. Can I?
Yes, yes, yes. It's interesting. It will be interesting post COVID-19 if there is, or post being quarantined or on a social distancing page, how we respond to some of those physical things that seem to come so natural from birth.
Yeah, that's true.
That has shifted. So if for those people out there who do have parents or maybe even someone with a good friend who doesn't have children, getting back to the idea of using this time as transformation or change, are there questions that we can ask our kids, our friends to guide that conversation besides just how are you? Because especially you know this growing up in Philly. Good, good, great, great.
Yeah, everybody just says what they think you want them to say. Um, that's, I think that's a difficult question. It's so much about the relationship in order to be able to ask those questions. So, in order to get to the tough stuff, right, you have to build rapport. You have to build that connection. And so, I think when you don't, so for those people that you do have a really good connection with, it's providing a safe space, providing an openness, and engaging them, maybe not necessarily about what's, not asking vague questions, but like saying like, how are you really doing? This is for people that obviously that you really are connected to, and you can ask those bigger questions, like, how are you really doing? I really want to hear. And like making the time and space, and like it needs to be heard in your voice that you want to know. um,
Mhm.
but you also have to be like socially aware enough to know whether they're ready to engage or not. And I think that's the other difficult piece, because some people are going through, to some degree, there's lots of grieving going on right now. Things have been lost, things have been just, there's so many disappointments. We're all going through such a huge transition, and um, we're trying to remain positive. And there's a place for that. There's also a place for allowing us to be okay with the fact that this is hard. This is not easy. Um, and so when we try to engage in those conversations, I really think it depends on the person. It really depends on the relationship. There's so many factors involved.
Mm.
Um, I volunteered for a crisis team next week with Mount Sinai, which is where I work here in the city. And so I was watching these like videos to kind of prep the team for, how to be talking to the frontline workers and when they do call in crisis. And it is so tricky. It's like, to some degree, you don't want to ask like direct questions. You just want to hold a space, and you want to say like, what can I do for you? How can I support you? And I think
Mhm.
that is a really big piece of it. It's just knowing the person. If you don't know the person, asking them what you can do to support them. And if you do know the person, trying to gauge if they are ready to have that conversation. And if you can gauge that correctly, then go ahead and say, I really want to know how you're doing. I really care enough to know how you're doing, you
Mm.
know?
That's brilliant, that's beautiful, and that's why you're a a social worker and I'm not.
Care.
No, it's so true to recognize that first of all, having difficult conversations is difficult, but necessary, and being able to read someone to know when they're ready. What what jumps out to me about what you were saying is, we've talked about this, men as a segment of the population who often struggle with maybe getting in touch with what they're feeling and bringing it to the surface that traditionally this has not always been nurtured in our society.
Mm,
And sometimes that is done through activities. You're going outside, playing sports,
mm,
doing something especially physical. And it would be interesting to see, and maybe we'll have a future conversation about this, for people who use those activities as a way of connecting. How do we still elicit responses from people in the absence of that?
mm. In the absence of the activity or the absence of words?
In the absence of the activity, that
Mm,
it's it's often common for couples, not just men as well, for people to do something, and that's when they're out in nature and they're talking and walking, or they're
yeah.
riding bikes, or I'll use the cliche example of playing golf as a way of opening that space. So in the first 5 minutes of playing golf, you don't say, so how's your depression?
Let's hope not. That could go really poorly.
I would generally not ask that question with anybody when they're holding a metal rod in their hand.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
That
Yeah. No, it's a great question because I don't think I don't necessarily know that. Excuse me. I don't know that it's a great answer because it really depends. Again, it's so much dependent on the person. It's a big question. Um, and I think you're actually bringing up that sometimes there's like this movement piece that can allow people and can elicit a conversation, and that's wonderful. But what happens when you're kind of stuck, and you're not able to do those things, and that can be really really difficult. I think there is this forced training ground for learning communication and
Mhm.
engaging in intentional communication, which I think we oftentimes avoid in general, not just men or women. It's just dependent on the person. Um, so something to consider. I know that that could be a very long
Yes,
conversation.
yes, yes. It's a conversation that we love to have. We have about 4 minutes left, and I don't know if I'm going to throw a huge curveball in the
Okay.
conversation, but general resilience. That in your work, are there people that come to the table more resilient, and is this something that we can develop?
Hmm. That's a great question. Yes, to the first, absolutely. There are people that come with more resilience. It's just so dependent on the person and their experience. I mean, there's so many, we are some of our parts. We've grown up with different experiences and different situations. And definitely there are some people that come to the table with, with resilience when they first start with me. And I can see that immediately. And I can see if they're able to move forward in a different way. And can we learn resilience? Absolutely. Yes, I think we can.
Mhm.
I think that it's really so much about how we perceive and how we think. And a lot of the time when we're engaging in the therapeutic process, when we're working together, we're learning about our thoughts. We're trying to understand what it is that we're thinking and how we're thinking, in order for us to maybe make some shifts, there. And um, the brain is an amazing thing. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Mhm.
But I absolutely think that it's a yes. I don't know how much more time you have left and how much time I can go into.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be another conversation, what that looks like. And there's fascinating studies, and you and I could talk about this for a long time, with the military and people after major life events such as 9/11, who came out of it with, I'm not going to say better mental health, but not as affected or could cope with it better than those who really suffered after some of these traumatic events.
I mean, adversity oftentimes, and this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier in the segment, is when we struggle, we have an amazing opportunity to learn and grow. We have to choose to do that, though, in that time, in that process. And if we engage in the process of learning and growing, adversity is a huge catalyst for change and growth. But um, really it's so much of a choice as to how we want to move forward. And I have the distinct pleasure of having so many people come to me who they are going through adversity and they want to move forward in a new way. They want
Mm.
to see things differently. They want to grow and change. And I mean, it's why I do what I do, because it excites me every single time when I see someone have a moment of like this, an aha moment of,
Mm.
yeah, like this is really hard right now and I can move forward in this way. And it takes time, it takes effort, but they're willing to engage in that process. And that's really exciting. It fuels me to continue to do what I'm doing.
Definitely. Oh, you're so inspiring. I love it. And that's a whole nother conversation that I definitely want to have in the upcoming weeks, is addressing the concerns and mental health of those people who serve individuals who are struggling
Mm.
psychologically, because I think you carry home a burden and issues hearing throughout the day that are much larger than probably the rest of us. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time for being here. Zoe as well. I know you're still on the call.
It was my pleasure. It was
Thanks,
very
Karis.
insightful.
Thank you so much. I'm Karis Painter. We were with Sarah Yonan and Zoe, social workers sharing their knowledge and their expertise. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usala Media. Until next time.